normally that's where I would stop on my presentation, but since we're trying to put so much together into one session, I'm going to ask you all to bear with me a little bit longer and really focus on what Governor Fallon's chair's initiative is. This is what we really highlighted at the end of our meetings in Connecticut and in New Mexico. This is our signature issue for this year. It's garnered way more attention than we thought. And I'm excited to share an overview of that work here because it's also what we shared with the governor yesterday with individuals in a number of states. The idea is that we need a better state system that aligns this together. And the 4 elements here on the right are what that framework is for this vision. You need to have a statewide vision that aligns these pieces. You need to have data systems that can answer some critical questions. You need to be looking at the partnerships, both at the state level, but then those local partnerships we talked about that are really doing this work to align. And then you need to think about aligned incentives and resources. The argument being, if you're not looking at how resources are used, if you're not looking at the incentives that are built into the current system, then we're not changing our current system. We're just patching on things on top of it that won't really get us to where we're going. So I'm going to walk through some best examples of promising practices from other states. There's a lot more I could share, so this is just some quick highlights. On the statewide vision piece, a lot of states have a goal or a vision for post-secondary completion. A lot of states have thought about this and said, well, we need to get to a certain percent of our entire population to a certain credential attainment level. A lot of states also have a strategy for economic development. But the first question is, are they connected? And usually the answer is no. This is really hard to do. It's easy to ask this, but the importance of connecting these takes a lot of focused work. And beyond that, then is there meaningful activity happening that's related to this vision? That's often where we fall down because a lot of us love to talk vision. But when we really do the work, it's almost like change. It's difficult, so you go first. So really getting this work done is what this piece is about. And I'm going to highlight Tennessee, partly because Tennessee came at this from a higher education lens. This isn't just the workforce system. This is our higher education system focused on this mission. They call it the Drive to 55. And what it is they looked at their state economy, they looked at the jobs coming in and realized they need to get their education to this 55% credential attainment level by 2025. But they're very explicit that this is a higher education, workforce, and economic development mission. This isn't just one silo of excellence. This is our entire system. But the emphasis is on the individual. It's on helping with unemployment, and it's on really improving the quality of life. And they're measuring it by per capita increases in income. This is a large vision for the state. This image I particularly like because a lot of states talk about a certain credential attainment level. In Tennessee, they've drilled down to say, well, this means 494,000 credentials in our state. Now, we know that trajectories change, and I can get more into the specifics about targeting our occupations and degrees. But for Tennessee, they've said, here's the ones that are going to grow. Here's the occupations that are high wage, high demand. And here's the different pipelines that individuals are going to move into. So here's the institutions responsible for parts of that 494 credentials. So now come back to our meetings with the governor and tell us, how are we doing? Are we improving these? Are we reaching our targets? Do we need to recalibrate? And they meet and talk about how we're going to get to 55%. And real quick, the reason why Tennessee's making such a strong effort on this is that the U.S. Chamber of Commerce did a report called Leaders and Laggards. Leaders and Laggards, in Tennessee looked and they were one of the primary laggards. And the governor was embarrassed. And the governor said, this is not acceptable. Now, I want to be clear, NGA didn't put out that report. But it got them in gear and said, we need to make a change. And so they put together this very aggressive plan, and now they're executing. I'm going to keep moving through these so I'm conscious of time. Improve data systems. If you don't have key data systems together, then you're still just talking about big lofty goals and big lofty ideas and aligning, but you need data to show that you're really making progress and that you're still aligned with the needs of the economy. But we have more data in our states often than we know what to do with. This isn't just about generating more data and then having somebody wade through it effectively. The first piece of this is, what are the key policy questions we want to answer? What do we really need to learn from our data? And once we have, because these questions are different in every state depending on the challenge and how you're executing the vision. But once we have the key policy questions, then we can strengthen our state's data infrastructure. Whether we need to align our K-12 system and our post-secondary system and add workforce outcomes so we can see how our pathway systems are built. Whether it's adding some real-time pieces to it, or whether it's just using it, looking at what's there and sifting through it and culling out reports that we don't need to do anymore, culling out some of the data we don't need to collect because it's not as helpful, and doing something that is. And then once you have that infrastructure, then you have to produce relevant products. And this seems the easiest, but it's actually the hardest. because there's lots of data out there that doesn't get used. And the goal should be for anybody that's producing products is to create information that state and local leaders can't live without, that they get used to going to because they make decisions based on the data that's provided. So quickly, I'm going to point out two states. One's Maryland. And the reason why I like pointing out Maryland's system, they have a governor that's always been very focused on data, but they guide it by questions. So with their system, here's an example of 6 of the questions that they need to answer for their state. Are we producing the right degrees for state jobs? How quickly do residents graduate? Once they add these questions, then they pull together the data to start answering those questions. And when the data doesn't quite answer it, they keep evolving because this is never a static situation. One other piece I'll highlight is Kentucky. I'm going to move through this slide pretty quickly, but they pulled together the longitudinal system and their other data to create what I think is one of the more effective charts on this type of information. So what you're looking at is Kentucky's healthcare system for the whole state. On the x-axis here is wages, so that's the amount of money that that occupation pays on average. On the y-axis is the percent change, so how quickly is that occupation growing? How fast is it adding new jobs? The size of the bubble is how many job openings there currently were when this chart was put together. So very quickly you can look across this and say, as Kentucky does, we have some low-wage, low-demand jobs, relatively speaking, that we're not going to prioritize. They're important, sure, but they're not where we want to put our dollars up front. That's not what we want to focus on first. On either side here, we have either high wage or high demand, and that's a little bit better, arguably. But it's not the high wage, high demand jobs that we want to start with, that we want to focus on. And what Kentucky does, this is their community and technical college system, is that they then look at all of those occupations, and if it's a yellow circle, they've said we have educational programs that are aligned to those occupations, that we're updating and modifying, but we are producing individuals for those occupations. If it's a blue circle, we don't. We don't have programs for those occupations, or they're inadequately aligned and we need to do some work to align it. And what you see here already is that they've had enough success that they've grown that high wage piece now. They've dropped back to the 75th percentile. And this is how they're building it out. And Kentucky can deliver this chart to a region, they can deliver it to an institution, and say, here's your area, here's your occupations that are growing, here's how your curriculum's lining up. And they put it all together so that policymakers can say, how are we doing? High quality partnerships. It's important to think about how this work's done at the state level. Where is that alignment taking place and how robust is that alignment? A lot of states will use their state workforce board. It's a natural place for this to be. And one message we convey all the time at NGA is that it's a strategic function that that board fulfills when it's operating at its highest capacity. It's looking across not just WIA, but where are the TANF training dollars, where are the TAA training dollars, where are the SNAP training dollars, what is our community college system doing, what's all of the resources and investments and how are we using those strategically. Other states have put together what they call a P20W council. Often these are more education focused. They're looking at that entire education pipeline. And this term keeps growing. It used to be P12 to get to the early eds, like K through 12. Then it was P16 because we wanted to add the higher education element. Now it's P20. Now states are adding the W to say, well, you really got to get to work. Now I've heard it's PJ, so from school to job. So these terms change, but the important part is everyone's realizing this pipeline has to grow, and we need to have conversations across that pipeline. And then lots of states are setting up or have other agencies, other committees, other councils that work on this. So when we're working with governors and states, we say, what's your quick analysis of all of the different pieces you have that are looking at this cross-agency piece? And how do you pull those together and infuse them with the leadership and the momentum so that you can really have these conversations? The regional partnership support is something the state also needs to focus on. Again, I put the image up here because this is where that image is most helpful. This is where you've identified a regional cluster, you've got your education system, and you've got partnerships connecting them. But how is the state not only supporting them, but where are the strongest examples of that alignment? Where are they taking place? So quickly I'll highlight Colorado. They've looked at every region of their state, and they've identified for themselves, again, don't worry about reading everything that's up here. The concept simply is, within each region, they've said we've got employers that are either connected or that we need to connect. So for Region 6 here, the bottom, very rural area of the state, they've already had a group of health and wellness employers that were convening on their own because they had to. So the state came in and said, wow, we need to support them. We need to offer whatever assistance we can. What additional challenges can we help them with? They also realized that critical to that part of the state is advanced manufacturing and food and agriculture. where there was no activity going on yet. It was driving their economy. So they started working on exploring, is there something that those individual employers can come together on and we can help them with to build the competitiveness of our region? This is Arizona's example of doing the same work. The reason why I like highlighting Colorado and Arizona is that they did this work with no new funding, none. They just looked at their system and said, we spend money and do work with all of these players all the time. This is how we're going to restructure and rethink about how we do this work. Instead of talking to individual employers or having 3 different sets of people that talk to individual employers, we're going to coalesce and we're going to be more strategic about it and talk about industry clusters. How are we working with groups of employers so we can build the scale? This is Washington's map of the same thing, one of the first places where we saw this work really taking place. So a lot of states have been driving this work and making sure it evolves over the years. And we can share again a lot more about this work if it's helpful to you. I'll spend a little less time on this piece because it's very unique to each state, but again, it's important to stress if you're not thinking about the resources and incentives in the system, you're not really changing the system. It's also the hardest work when you start getting into fights with whomever it is in different conversations. That's when you know you've gotten to this 4th level. It's also when you know you're actually doing the real work that needs done. So some state examples of this, I mentioned this briefly, just asset and capacity mapping. Virginia recently realized that they had no idea how much money was spent across their workforce system, again, on education and training. They had no idea what the dollar amount was. And it took them longer than they thought they needed to just to get that dollar amount. But they have it this year. And now they can start to look at, so how are we spending that, what's effective and what's less effective. Performance funding ideas, this is again moving from just paying for services as is to what are the outcomes that we're paying for? What are the results that we expect for our investments in the state? Workforce board certification processes, we do a lot of these pieces to make sure we're aligning that whatever the entity is, that we're really aligning strategically across our system. Grant funding and review, often a single silo of excellence, so to speak, will do this on their own. But some states have said, well, we're going to bring in our K-12, our higher ed, our workforce, and our economic development system and put together a panel review process that collectively will put out money to do this work. We'll decide who gets the grants, we'll decide who reviews them, and find out if we're paying for the right individuals and the right work. So that's the end of my marathon piece. Thank you very much for sitting through all of it with me. It's a lot of information that is critically important. Again, we stretched this out over 2 days with states and governors just recently, and I'm getting lots of requests to continue to give this information. It's a high-level piece that takes a lot of drilling down, and we've made commitments to continue to do that here in Maine. But if we have any quick questions on anything that individuals have seen, I'm happy to answer before we move to Glenn to provide some additional information to the state.
On your regional partnership support for Colorado and Arizona, who defines the regions and how are they defined?
Wonderful question. I can. That's usually one of the first important, difficult questions that come up. The critical thing to remember for our standpoint is that employers think of regions in their own way, and they often cross whatever boundaries we have. They'll cross workforce and board areas, they'll cross economic development areas, sometimes they cross states. So whatever group, or however you define regions, you have to make sure there's enough flexibility so that employers can connect across arbitrary bureaucratic lines. Each one of those states did it differently. Arizona focused on some workforce areas. Colorado, because of what I just shared, focused on economic development areas. The important piece is to define areas that match metropolitan areas or rural areas, but so that employers look at that and say, yes, I can work with this group of individuals and have a full conversation. Oftentimes it's not neat and pretty, it's just important to get started, and you can always realign areas as you need to if you have to, but don't spend too much time on getting the areas just right, just try to get started. Yeah.
Chip Roach, a business owner, state WIB member, and longtime volunteer in workforce development. I've got 2 questions, and I love your presentation. One is you, I think, rightfully identified that the key element is identifying a convener.
Yeah.
To me, that is the absolute key. And my question is, WIA doesn't provide for any kind of a meaningful support of a convener.
Right.
How do you fund a convener? That's question number 1.
Yeah.
Question number 2, and I think I know the answer, but I'd like to hear you say it. You talked about middle skill occupations which are providing family wages and benefits and all those good things. And you talked about how the percentage of people in those occupations has dropped about 10 points in the past, well, how the time span was on your chart. Is focusing on those middle skill occupations swimming against the tide? Or is it something that we should be doing to either preserve or change that trend?
A little bit of both. I'm going to let our chief economist address some of that too for the state of Maine, but quickly on the middle skills piece. I do want to be clear that there's some confusion about that term middle skills, which is why I went into it a little bit. What we're losing are the blue collar manufacturing, the automated jobs. We're losing those. They're not completely gone. They're still almost half of our economy right now, but they're being automated, and we need more skills to think about how they're automated. So one person now can do the job of 5 or 10 used to do before, and we need to be aware of that and think about how that works. There are whole sectors of our economy that are growing, and we can talk about it in Maine, but healthcare is growing, others are growing. So the new middle skill term is an acknowledgement that you still need analytical ability, you need additional skill sets for the new middle skill jobs. And this is hugely changing. We have a project with the Harvard Business School on exactly what is this new middle? How is it eroding? How do we build it up? What's the state role in looking at it? But being aware that it's changing and being targeted and how we address it is what's important. So the direct answer to that question is going to be different in every state. Maine's got areas that are growing that we need to focus on. I know there's an IT project that's happening here in some of the universities. It's critical to think about that. Different states think about each one of these sectors differently. To your first question on the intermediary, every state that really launches into this and drives forward, about 6 months to 12 months in, they come back with that exact question. Because it's the key to this.
That's the question.
It's the key to connecting this work. And the first challenge is trying not to institutionalize an intermediary. That's exactly what happens. And we've got versions of that right now. You need somebody who's credible with employers and can get the ear of educators and trainers. Somebody that can navigate, and I like to use the term, a lot of us in this room are fluent in workforce. Most people aren't. But you need to be fluent in business, fluent in workforce, fluent in education and training. Those are rare individuals. And they need to be persuasive so that they can say, hey, I'm going to have a conversation tomorrow. This is going to help your bottom line. You can talk to an employer in business and get them to a table and make something happen. Now, in areas that have done this for a while, it's always someone different. So the city of Tacoma in Washington has 3 different critical entities working on this. They got their workforce board, their chamber, and their community college. Each one of them is an intermediary for a different industry because of how relationships played out. The college, I'm going to mix up which one's which. I believe the college is working directly as an intermediary with the healthcare employer because those connections were there, and so they were the trusted intermediary, and they brought all the other partners to the table, but they're the ones that facilitated. The chamber was the intermediary for the manufacturing group because the individual on the chamber had the right connections with employers to make that a vibrant connection. And then the workforce board had the right connection with more of the rural agricultural piece because they focused on that for a while. So I wouldn't get hung up on who organizationally the intermediary is. How are we able to bring individuals together, and who are those people and those organizations that can do it to make that happen? I'm sure that I'm well running out of time, but if there's a couple more questions, I can certainly answer a few.
I think Mel had.
Just a question. I've been on the state workforce board for several years, and prior to that, the other previous iteration of the Jobs Council. And we have in statute the state workforce board, cross-departmental involvement, activity, the right players that you talk about. That's already in our state statute. We just passed a bill in the legislature, very robust, talking about industry partnerships, but it was not funded.
Mm-hmm.
So, to me, how do we get this unstuck from politics in dollars being at the table? Like you had talked about, siloed funding.
Yeah.
As long as we stay in those silos, which Maine seems to be pretty entrenched in right now, we're having a hard time just running our state workforce board because of lack of funding and lack of resources and dedicated, committed capacity.
Yeah. So a lot of this, I won't steal any of the conversation points from our commissioner. We'll touch on a lot of this coming up. But I will say, that's not unique. Those challenges exist in every state, in every region. This is the reality of our system. And because these stark problems and challenges are becoming more real, initially it's getting a little bit harder to decide how we're going to solve them. That's the challenge. States that have been able to move the needle and to coalesce have, again, it comes back to some of that convener to get everybody to realize, and I love the phrase that the commissioner said, we need every Mainer. So this is everybody understanding the critical challenges and how we all play a different role, because this challenge is so big, we need everybody to come together. But the point's well taken, and the only initial advice I'd give, just generally speaking, is, and it sounds easy, instead of focusing on all the things that we don't have, and the funding we don't have, and the siloed political problems we have, where are the strengths in our state? Who's already doing this work? Who are the critical employers that are right now saying we don't have our workforce? Where are the education and training programs that are producing people that are productive? Where, and I guarantee you they're there. And every time I've been in a state, they've got a list of what they think it is. They double that list by getting into this work. Suddenly things come out of the woodwork of what's happening. Employers start to realize, hey, this has got some traction and some movement. And they start talking to elected officials. So identifying strengths and building on those is how it starts in states that work. And I will reiterate one last piece. You don't need new money to do it. In fact, new money can be a detriment. There's good and bad ways to do it, but when you throw a lot of money on the table, you get a lot of interest. You layer on a new level of work and programs, then that money goes away and the effort itself unravels. So the real strength is doing this initially because we have to and we have no other choice. And then once you've proven that some things work and you've got some data to show how it works, then you come in with funding with more support because people realize it's important and then fund what's working. At least that's an approach that a couple states have taken. A few others couldn't wait for that. And so they're putting in funding, and there's ways to do that as well. And if you're fortunate enough to get in that situation, California is a big state. They're spending $250 million on a project similar to this. And we're very happy to help them think about how not to waste a lot of money. But most states don't have that privilege, and that can be a strength. So I'm sure, okay.
If all the money doesn't come in under one management system, how do you create a change like this in a hurry?
This change on the scale that we're talking about, some of the states I'm highlighting have been at this for 10, 15 years. This is a one step at a time process. You start with here's where we're at. There is a little more alignment in every state than we think. And then it's what's our next step that we can take to align better. So a lot of these states will say, here's our different strategic plans. That's one way to go about it. For the next year, here's how we're going to move them more closely together. We'll reevaluate in the next year. Just doing an asset mapping of all the resources is a wonderful start to that. But you do this piece by piece. And then sometimes it takes one silo of excellence to start that work and say, I know change is difficult. We're going to go first. We're going to map our resources. We're going to map our programs. We're going to pull together the data that we have. We're going to show where we're linking to these other systems and where we could use some additional help. And then the next step is having a more meaningful, data-driven conversation with agencies to say, we've gone first, you now can come in with us. And if you took your funding stream and our funding stream and we did some alignment there, we can do even more. Okay, question? Sorry, this is all strictly proprietary. No. Yes, it's on the screen here. In fact, I think we've got copies ready to make. Everybody can have everything that's here. Absolutely.
Copies are in there.
Yeah, there's copies at the entrance.
Yeah, well, I wanted to digital.
Yeah.
Digital
Oh,
copies,
right.
so you went through it very quickly.
Yes.
Very great job about that.
Thanks.
But there are some pieces that I'd like to go back and really spend some time on.
Yes.
Like either the number of the particular slide or whatever.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. It's a huge file, so just kind of logistics really quick. There's a PDF version that we'll make available to everybody. If for some reason someone wants the full, big, interactive version of it, we'll share my information, let me know, and I'll find a way to get that to you as well if you want to recreate the presentation for your members or in your state. That's definitely encouraged. I got our last question.
Hi, Garrett. I'm Tracy Foley. I work for Career Systems Development. We operate job corps centers.
Excellent.
And I was just wondering, particularly in the work in Kentucky, I believe there are 8 job corps centers in that state. Were they involved with this at all? With the work with the contractors at the table?
not sure in Kentucky, but we'll have to follow up to get that exact part of the answer for you, but I'm actually going to use your question to make a different point. Which is that we can have 20 of those questions in this room. This is my program, it's doing great things, nobody knows about it. How do we need to look across the system to say, wow, the Job Corps is doing stuff I didn't realize. It's taking people, and not just creaming individuals off the top, but it's looking at individuals that have some barriers and correcting those and moving them through a system. That's exactly what this is, and a lot of individuals may not have known that. Same thing with Jobs for America's graduates, same thing for, there's a lot of programs there. So this is really a systems conversation too. How do the pieces fit together? What parts do we need to scale? How do we talk about our programs? Because we all feel like, those of us, and I grew out of the workforce system, it's the redheaded stepchild of a lot of these systems, right? But then every system will tell you that. So I don't know the direct answer to it. I'm happy to follow up, and I can connect with the folks in Kentucky if that's important. But I do think that's a wonderful example of what certainly you all can set out to do tomorrow. I was looking at those programs and which ones really are leading the way for us.
When you get into the educational systems, is it usually the community colleges you're working with in these states, or is it the universities? And where is CTE at all?
Every state is hugely different, and they'll prioritize different versions of that. Kentucky is one of my favorites to talk about the community and technical college system because of that bubble chart I shared. They've been doing this work since 2004. They're driving it. They've done it in the best way. The state's identified industry clusters for that state, and now they're aligning their entire state community and technical college system to those clusters, looking at data and doing increasing alignment year after year. Oklahoma is a state that really is driving this from their CTE side. At first, they identified that as a core strength for that state, and so they're really building out that system. 70% of the students, as I'm told, interact with that CTE system in Oklahoma. That's not the case in every state. So again, this is often where you've got the political momentum and the understanding, and you've got champion programs, just like you have champion conveners. And so you start with those and build them out as much as you can, help understanding. But again, you knit together the system, and you shouldn't leave anything out. And CTE, if workforce is a redheaded stepchild, CTE is one that's like one of our best kept secrets and weapons, especially for what we're talking about here. There's lots of wonderful lessons that we can take. And in fact, the $250 million we'll put in California is really looking at wonderful CTE programs and trying to add more of that element to their entire K-12 education system. So we'll talk more about that stuff too. So thank you very much for humoring me for the time I've been up here, and I'll be around for other questions. So thank you.